though most of this country's natural appeasers are fully paid-up members. Its respectable voices, the New York Times and the State Department over there, the Guardian...
Thanks.
The Guardian and the Foreign Office here are adamant that President Saddam must be forced to disgorge Kuwait. They place their faith in a toughly enforced economic blockade of Iraq to achieve it.
Indeed, while the Sunday Times, as a respectable advocate of war, suggests likely deals would just produce...
Kuwait, the sequel! And this time, the baddie would have biological and nuclear arsenals to guarantee victory.
The crisis finds that newspaper's teeth clenched for the crunch.
The sooner the war party, with its aim of freeing Kuwait and toppling President Saddam, starts calling the shots again, the better. That is not warmongering. It is a willingness to suffer casualties now to avoid a Holocaust later. If the peace party has its way, that Holocaust will be inevitable.
Back at the Guardian and the Foreign Office, we are flattered to learn that we are not wimps or goons, just inadvertent initiators of the end of the world. There's something very comforting about that. But how does the Sunday Times get to be so certain about everything?
That Holocaust will be...
Not possible, but...
inevitable.
Not maybe inevitable, but...
will be inevitable.
This paper thinks in bold italics, so when the Sunday Times takes the moral decision for people to get killed, it knows the alternative is something worse. But listen to Ben Pimlett on the facing page.
When the gassing and the bombing start, the main sufferers will not be Saddam and the Ba'athite fascists, but the regime's innocent subjects, including Kuwaitis.
Just as newspapers should avoid thinking in bold italics, so perhaps they should resist the temptation to speak from the throne of heaven.
That is not warmongering. It is a willingness to suffer casualties now to avoid a Holocaust later.
Let me conjugate a verb. I suffer casualties, you get hurt, he dies. But since the Sunday Times challenges the peace party, perhaps this is the moment to say something about the war party in the press. The Economist, no yellow-bellied lefty, has a view on gas. Richard Cheney, the US Defense Secretary, is too ambiguous about the stuff, wittering on about...
a wide range of options.
Not good enough.
Saddam Hussain should know that if he uses gas, he'll get gas back.
It won't, of course, just be him who gets it, this being an objection to gas. And the Economist concedes.
Poison gas conjures up horror for good reason. Even 70-odd years after, memories of its terrible effects remain.
Indeed they do. Wilfred Owen.
Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime.
The Economist is magisterial.
It is not uniquely nasty.
And most unlikely to be used in St. James's Street. I stay with Wilfred Owen, who faced it.
If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori.
As USA Today puts it,
Chemical weapons have got a bad rap.
The Economist does not exactly proclaim the sweetness and propriety of dying for one's country, only the cool sophistication of meeting evil with evil.
This means that if Iraqi troops used moderately nasty stuff like mustard gas...
Moderately nasty. Gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter...
they would get the same back. If they used the more deadly nerve gases, they could expect a shower of VX or sarin.
And gentlemen of England now abed will think themselves ashamed they were not here upon St. Sarin's Day. I'm sorry to be so heavily into quotations, but really this sort of godlike twaddle is simply a playing with fire by people who don't even know that fire is hot. It also speaks a savage mood cognate with that of the trash papers. The Star again.
Hang him high! Saddam Hussein will be dragged back to America in chains and strung up if the Yanks get their hands on him.
There must be a PhD in it for the graduate ready to research a thesis on the role of sadomasochistic imagery in the popular press. But the real common thread of all war party writing is a sort of blazing gaiety. Norman McCrae wrote in his column the perfect expression of war party psychology.
Not having killed anybody myself since 1945, I nurture some hopes that a war with Iraq might be a quick one. If you fight a third world enemy in jungles, as in Vietnam or 1942 Burma, he infiltrates eternally through trees behind you.
Swine.
If you fight a war in deserts, you can drive from El Alamein to southern Tunisia without stopping.
This tone of semi-divine certainty indicates a former deputy editor of The Economist, but he continues with a sort of insouciance which stops the dancing.
I can envisage superior American targeting from the air might take out every Iraqi tank, lorry and grounded aircraft in a 3-day turkey shoot.
Grandpa will show them. Grandpa showed Hitler. Less surprising than such grandiloquent beer mumblings in a major newspaper is the editorial in the Sunday Telegraph. The comment pages of this paper form a sort of adventure playground, perhaps for children ardent for some desperate glory.
War requires a girding of loins rather than a wringing of hands.
Though what follows is, I think, gloriously silly. Compared with the turkey shoot and the short way with mustard gas, it's clean and innocent. It doesn't indeed know that fire is hot, but it doesn't actually enjoy burning.
Perhaps there was and is more to be said for the spirit of jingoism than its critics are prepared to appreciate. It does not arise from an unawareness of the horrors of war.
It comes
from the realization that the only way not to be daunted by these horrors is by making light of them.
That seems to me to make with the candour and straightforwardness which are its author, Peregrine Worsthorne's honourable, wrong-headed stamp, an unanswerable point against the war party, as he adds.
Unless a nation goes to war with a will, with a flourish of trumpets, it does not go to war at all. A steeling of the heart is required, and at some point even a closing of the mind.
So war is only to be fought with a plated heart and a shut mind to the sound of a consort of bugles. Unless thus anaesthetised, we can't do it. Some desert peoples find that they make war best on cheap stimulants, which brings us neatly enough to Robert Kilroy's Silk in the Daily Express on the King of Jordan.
But even if Jordan's quisling King Hussain or weasel-mouthed PLO leader Yasser Arafat managed to persuade Saddam to comply fully with the UN resolutions, it would not be enough. Not if Saddam survives.
Jordan's quisling King Hussain. Chambers' dictionary gives quisling as
one who aids the enemy, a native puppet prime minister set up by an occupying foreign power. Vidkun Quisling, who played that part in Norway during German occupation 1940-45.
Firstly, King Hussein is the legitimate hereditary ruler of Jordan. Secondly, Saddam of Iraq has not occupied that country. He might have, but he didn't. Thirdly, he is not its enemy. In fact, as a string of demonstrations have made clear, he is mightily popular there. He shouldn't be, but he is. What Kilroy Silk means is that the king isn't a quisling. Who else? Sir John Jr. on the Mail on Sunday.
Has Bush got enough bottle?
If Saddam gives in, says Sir John, that will be the end of Saddam.
If he doesn't capitulate, has Mr. Bush enough bottle actually to press the trigger and wage war to make him? And if he hasn't, would that mean the effective end of the presidency of George Bush?
Much exposure to the whisky mist of men talking bloody as a change from talking dirty inclines me almost to the feminist view. The Economist's man with the canister, Norman McRae, with the old soldier's nasty chortle, Perry Worsthorne thanking God who has matched us with this hour, Kilroy Silk pretending to exist, Sir John doing his imitation of Sir John. Are they not a bunch of males obeying their hormones? And shouldn't it worry someone that we, the British, with no economy to speak of, now shout at real nations to behave like real men, as The Economist explains to the Japanese?
Japan has been presented with two ideal opportunities to show that it now has what it takes to be a leader of the post-Cold War world.
The tone here is relentlessly John Cleese.
Iraq's invasion of Kuwait gave Japan an excellent chance to be, if you like, a leading follower.
But after condemning the invasion,
it was back to a more familiar Japanese posture, lying low.
Clever Japan. But as the headline puts it in best bullying prefect manner,
stand up, Japan!
I just don't believe this. When Japan was minded to be a leader, she took very bloodily us and the Americans apart. Militarily, Japan has the skills, soldiering genius, and war culture to rub Britain and the US between foot and floor. Yet when, thank God, she forsakes war to run the most brilliantly successful economy in the world, a financial sheet in debt-whelmed 1% growth Britain, speaking for credit-stretched America, talks to her like the captain of the first 15 addressing a bedwetter. I think we deserve a gentler topic. The Festival Hall's celebration of the avant-garde.
Two poles of a brave new world.
The headline says it all.
Public out of tune with Stockhausen.
Festival Hall
faces a financial disaster over two contemporary classical music concerts next weekend.
Who was on?
The avant-garde composers Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and Pierre Boulez.
And how many people were going?
About 10% of the tickets had been sold.
Prompting the management
to complain of a Little Englander attitude to modern music.
Meaning that when they have something awful and important for us, we don't come.
Even worse, for the concert on September the 17th of chamber works by Bernd Alois Zimmermann and Henzer, only 7 tickets had been sold.
This I can believe. I was once trapped by clever programming, they put him on before Schubert, into hearing Bernd Alois Zimmermann. The program note said that he confined himself to a range of 1.5 tones. He had. I've heard defective air conditioning with more thematic potential. It isn't a case of
public out of tune with Stockhausen.
Or Stockhausen out of tune with public. Listen to what he says.
When you have the Chinese anthem next to the sounds of a student demonstration at Aachen, it sounds a dangerous idea.
It sounds like a perfectly really awful one.
It is dangerous. It's a question of how fearless you are.
Do you have the bottle for Stockhausen? We lack the nerve to proclaim these Goths as pains in the ear. We don't want to look like the people who couldn't take Debussy. So let's leave it to the low masses who elect whether or not to go to the concert halls. But hang on a minute, didn't the Americans in Panama play non-stop heavy metal atrocity pop at poor General Noriega until he surrendered? 2 hours of Stockhausen's hymnen for pre-recorded tapes and orchestral improvisation should do the trick with Saddam. That piece is described rather girlishly by Malcolm Hayes in the Sunday Telegraph as
Reckless, extravagant, tendentious, wildly uneven, often apocalyptically loud, and still as exultantly controversial as when the work was completed in 1967.
that ought to have the butcher of Baghdad coming out with his hands above his head, or at any rate, over his ears. Good night.